Hello, you're watching Initiative Africa. My name is Asha Samput. Welcome to your weekly magazine featuring Africa on the move through smart innovations and initiatives that work. This week we head for the Ivorian roads in the middle of the countryside, where a point license system is being introduced to fight road incivility. And with our guests, we follow the jazz musicians of the continent. Well, it's time for Initiative Africa. Let's get on with the show with our top stories today. Photography and music. This photographer has dedicated his life to jazz men and jazz women, a music born elsewhere but which is more and more seducing Africa with a transmission from generation to generation. As our guest Samuel Nja Kwa reveals through his work, Jazz on My Mind and Africa is Music, he's our guest this week.
I started to meet a lot of jazz musicians, and every time I interviewed them, I wanted to have a picture of them. And I had my little camera. They would pose for me.
A point license system has arrived in Côte d'Ivoire. Reducing road accidents and raising public awareness is the #1 objective as borders are open again after the COVID period.
Given the numerous accidents in Côte d'Ivoire, it is vital that citizens go to our training centers to acquire some basic knowledge about the road safety rules.
Listening to jazz in Lagos, we head for the Truth Village, one of the most popular addresses in the Nigerian metropolis, where trumpeter Ituk Ubong awaits us.
But so there was this fateful day, a trumpet player came to the church to play. After the church service, my mom took me to the trumpet player and then handed me over to the trumpet player saying she wants him to teach me the trumpet, whose name is Etop Adolphus.
Helping everyone to understand the concept of preventing or reducing the risk of accidents on the roads is the objective that Côte d'Ivoire has set itself. Faced with the increase in road accidents and the alarming number of victims, estimated at 1,200 deaths and more than 21,000 injuries per year, the Ivorian government has just introduced a points-based license. Our journalist Mark Kamara went to the South Comoé region. It was a few weeks after the opening of the borders closed since March 2020 due to the COVID pandemic. Take a look.
This is what we call vertical signage. All the signs that are on the roads are there to inform us.
Back to driving school for these young drivers. The instructor has to refresh their memories and teach them the rules of proper driving in traffic once again. About 46 accidents are recorded every day in Côte d'Ivoire. Since November 2021, this country has taken up the challenge to improve road conditions, and strict measures taken by the government, in particular a point withdrawal system from their driving license, has motivated some of the drivers to follow road safety awareness courses.
Given the numerous accidents in Côte d'Ivoire, it is vital that citizens go to our training centers to acquire some basic knowledge about the road safety rules. According to the latest figures from Africa Road Safety Organization, 96% of road accidents are due to human negligence. So humans are responsible for what is happening. This is why people need training and above all need to be responsible while driving a vehicle. We hold our lives in our own hands, the lives of other people, also because the road is a common space that we share with many. Insurance is not consistent with this type of activity.
Aboissou, the capital of South Comoé, has one of the busiest and unavoidable road networks for traveling in the sub-region, countries such as Ghana, Togo, Benin and Nigeria. This region has one of the highest traffic accident rates in Côte d'Ivoire. Faced with increase in road traffic accidents and the alarming number of victims, estimated at 1,200 deaths and more than 21,000 injured during 2022 only, awareness raising remains the most effective alternative.
It is really important to eradicate accidents, if not at least drastically reduce them in Côte d'Ivoire. Figures announced by the Minister of Transport are really bad and not great to see or hear when it comes to the level of transport and road safety in Côte d'Ivoire.
Most accidents take place on international routes. The National 100 in the south of Kamoi, which is part of the country's 1,575 kilometers of international road, is also a very deadly one. To reduce the number of victims, Côte d'Ivoire is stepping up controls and awareness-raising campaigns on the roads. Maximum vigilance level on these roads, and police are relentless in their efforts to ensure the safety of motorists on the roads.
I think it's a good initiative because we need to be sensitized as we drive, but we don't have all the information. Today, when the information is out, and by the time it will be in force in due course. In the meantime, the population is not really aware. So we really need this. We really need to do this during quite some time. This one, stop him. Sir, pull over.
While these crackdowns and sensitization campaigns are appreciated by some, others deplore the pressure of the rackets employed by some police officers on the roads.
What the government is doing, raising awareness, it's great. I think it's a good thing. The undisciplined drivers will become more aware. However, often it's the police who really frustrates us. These guys are a headache. Honestly, we're tired of them. When they arrest us, they don't even look at the papers. The guys don't like to look at any documents. You have to give them something.
Speed is not the only plague that causes disasters on the roads, but alcohol and the use of smartphones have become a scourge. Last January, the National Safety Council strongly encouraged the Ministry of Transport to implement the awareness and enforcement components of its National Road Safety Strategy to be executed by 2025. Our guest Samuel Nja Kwa is a jazz photographer. From his childhood in France and his apprenticeship in photography to his discovery of this musical movement born in the United States, he has continued to pursue musicians on all continents, and particularly in Africa, where his Cameroonian father took him for the first time to jazz concert. From his very special photographic and human encounters around music, he worked on a writing project during the COVID lockdown, hence his latest book, Jazz on My Mind. He revealed his work to Laurent Soustras and Thierry Schiller. Samuel Nja Kwa, hello and welcome to Initiative Africa. Your latest book, Jazz on My Mind, covers your 22 years of work as a photographer of jazz musicians from around the world. How did you come up with the idea for this book?
Alors cet ouvrage est né pendant la période de la Covid.
The idea of this book was born during the COVID period, when everyone was confined at home and had nothing to do. I couldn't go to concerts anymore, I couldn't go to see the musicians, so I started to look at my archives and work, and each photo evoked a moment I spent with the musicians.
Un moment que je passais avec les musiciens.
And so I thought, this could be a bit of a story, telling the story of each image I took of the musicians. So the idea was born like that. I really wanted to tell the story through my experience, the jazz that I experienced during these last 22 years.
Your work is associated with a photographic itinerant exhibition. How is it perceived in Africa?
I just came back from Cotonou in Benin, and I held an exhibition at the French Institute. And the exhibition was very successful, and I already led a photo workshop with young people. So I talked to them about my work as a photographer, about shows and concerts. They were interested to know how I worked, so the workshop was based on that. And then there was the exhibition, which lasted about 3 weeks, where I met many other young people, especially from elsewhere, and everyone really welcomed the exhibition. They asked a lot of questions, and especially because many musicians are of a certain age, I was asked how I managed to approach them, to meet them. So it was very warmly welcomed.
How do you work with your characters? You have a very different approach depending on whether you are on a concert stage or in a studio. How do you approach your characters? How do you manage to photograph them to get such lively pictures?
Well, I also have a background in journalism because I also write my stories. So when I photograph musicians off stage, I spend a lot of time asking them questions about their lives, their way of being and doing things.
Je passe beaucoup de temps à leur poser des questions sur leur vie.
And their approach to music. And then often it's also subjects and pictures that are in relation to Africa. The characters are Afro, they are of African origin.
Mais ils sont d'origine africaine. Et donc on parle beaucoup d'Afrique, de leur approche avec l'Afrique.
Therefore, we speak a lot about Africa and their approaches to Africa. So I take the picture with that in mind, what they evoke in me. Well, the fact that I spend a lot of time with them talking allows me to have this Afro-African approach to their image.
Afro de leur image, quoi, en fait. Voilà, c'est-à-dire que c'est des photographes.
They are musicians who are very interested in Africa, so my photography is really to be close to who they are.
Une photographie qui leur ressemble. Et quand ils sont sur scène.
And when they are on stage, you have to be very patient. You have to look and observe how they behave on stage, how they move, and what their attitude is.
Quelle est leur attitude? Et moi, j'essaye de souvent.
And I often try to capture, let's say, like a mimic, because often musicians, all musicians, have a mimic, a way of being on stage. Either they put their instruments down in a certain way, or they stand on stage in a different way. And it's this moment that I try to capture.
And what about this moment? Is it just instinct or is it action?
It's, I would say, a pleasure, because when you manage to capture the moment that characterizes the musician, it's really a pleasure. You say to yourself, I've got it, that's it.
Voilà.
You travel and take pictures, and somewhere the two are linked. I'm thinking of your Nigeria subject, your trip to Nigeria and your meeting with Femi Kuti and his family.
Déjà le voyage, on va parler du voyage parce que.
First of all, the journey. We're going to talk about travel because I dreamed of being a pilot when I was a child, so I always have the idea of traveling.
Mais la rencontre avec Femi, c'était.
And that was just a diversion. But meeting Femi was, well, my dream was always to meet a fella, his father, but I never got that opportunity. I thought that the day I have the opportunity to go to Nigeria, I would seize that opportunity to meet the Kuti family. And I often met Femi Kuti in Paris or his brother soon. And one day I was in Dakar and met a musician called Ade Bantu. He is a Nigerian musician, a German half-breed. He is Nigerian and German, and he said to me, if you have the opportunity, come to Nigeria. I will welcome you in my house. I said yes, and then 2 months later I called him and said I am at the airport in Lagos, and he said, what shall we do? I told him I would like to meet the Kuti family, and he immediately picked up the phone. He called and I had an appointment. And everything went well. Femi warmly welcomed us. I interviewed him and photographed him, of course, as he was getting ready to go on stage. I went to the new shrine where the Kuti family often plays. I even visited the Fela Museum. It has nothing to do with the exhibition that is taking place in Paris at the moment.
Il n'a rien à voir avec l'exposition qui a lieu en ce moment à Paris, mais j'ai eu aussi à voir aussi sa sœur.
But I also had to see his sister and his other brothers, who are not musicians. It's a big family.
Fait beaucoup de, on va dire
Quite respected that people often come to consult for their opinion on music, even their approach to life. It's a family that's very respected.
Famille qui est très respectée, quoi.
And what did you take away from this trip to Nigeria, the country where jazz really vibrates?
Alors c'est un pays qui est en pleine ébullition.
It's a country that's in full swing. It's not just jazz. There's a lot of music being made there. In terms of jazz, there is an absolutely incredible Nigerian scene. I've met a lot of jazz musicians from elsewhere who I also had the opportunity to see at Midem in Cannes. And it's a scene that moves a lot. Much deserved to be known in Europe.
Gagne à se faire connaître en Europe, quoi, en fait.
Welcome to the second part of our show. Let me now take you to the lively nightlife of Lagos for this second report. More than 2 years ago, the Nigerian megalopolis, like many cities in Africa and elsewhere, woke up hungry for music and dance after months of lockdown. And in this jazz club, the music and chants enthusiasts, our journalist Hugo Yuana had slipped into the rehearsals of composer and trumpeter Ito Kubong, rising star of the Nigerian scene, to listen to his cocktail of jazz and Afrobeat. Look, or rather, listen.
It's a typical rehearsal day at the Truth. With COVID-19 restrictions in place, social gatherings and open performances are on hold in Lagos, Nigeria's entertainment capital. The band's rehearsal do not contravene the COVID-19 orders in Nigeria. Nigeria over the years has been a nurturing ground for an array of musical talents. It is home to Ito Kubong, one of Nigeria's in-demand trumpeter, composer and band leader. Born and raised in Lagos, the entertainment and commercial nerve center of Africa's most populous nation, Nigeria.
I developed interest in playing the conga drums in the church, and I remembered I also attempted playing the drum set. But so there was this fateful day, a trumpet player came to the church to play. After the church service, my mom took me to the trumpet player and then handed me over to the trumpet player, saying she wants him to teach me the trumpet, whose name is Etop Adolphus.
Embracing his passion, he began playing the trumpet at the young age of 14, and by the age 16, he went under the tutelage of various professional artists such as Victor Ademofe, the late legendary Sir Victor Olaya, and the phenomenal Femi Kuti. He acquired his musical education from Peter King College of Music, Moson School of Music, and the University of Cape Town, South Africa.
I got exposed to the likes of Malcolm X, Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, and a whole lot of others who actually reflects consciousness, the black consciousness. I think those are the basic influence I had, musically, and, for me to decide that I wanted to be a musician or end up as a musician, which I am today.
His inspiration from jazz, Afrobeat, Ekombi, highlife and earthly elements, wind, water and fire, forges his musical philosophy, which he calls earth music. This epitomizes the blend of music he dishes out from his sacred place, the Truth in Lagos.
We all know what Truth is all about. It's like a musical center where people are allowed to come in to display their talent and given the ability to be able to tell the truth about the society at large. And as the manager here, we tend to make the place accommodating for people and put things in order for a successful program here. So, like our weekly activities, from Monday till Sunday, we operate 24 hours.
Well, for me, the process of me writing my music, or the process of me composing music and the songs I write and I perform are basically of the fact that I need to educate the human race. I need to educate Africa, which is like the bone of contention for me always in my thoughts. The African man, like I said, they don't have this history. See, they don't know that Africa isn't the original name for Africa. They don't know that Akebulan is the original name for Africa.
He performs with his enigmatic band, Etuk's Philosophy, whose rhythms and beat unleashes the musical prowess of Etuk. Together with his band, they have forged a bond beyond the stage. His song has a positive message that addresses the ills in the society as well as appeals to the heart and mind of listeners.
We've been playing for a couple of years now, and we express our thoughts through music. Yeah, and the challenges and the experience of playing for the Etuk's Philosophy is one of the best bands in the world because it comprises of lots of instruments and instrumentalists. Earth music is it talks about life, talks about love, talks about peace, talks about love for humanity, you know, and it brings unity together. We express our emotions through music, musically.
The Truth Club is a buzzing habitat that attracts people of like musical minds united under the melodious tunes of Etuk Ubang's Earth music.
In the next 10 years, the Truth is going to be in all corners of the world, you know, also still carrying the flag and that education of the black, that education of the African man.
With 2 albums and an extended play, he has performed on various stages within and outside Africa with over 10,000 ticket sales. His song Black Debtor was number 2 on the corner playlist on Apple Music Jazz, and his album Africa Today was on the top 10 playlist of BBC 3 Radio. He leads a new generation of jazz music performers and lovers of his rare genre of earth music.
Let's now get back to our guest, photographer Nja Kwa, who tells us about his career and how he sees jazz spreading in African society. Let's hear more from him. Nja Kwa, you said, I quote, "Jazz has invaded my daily space, but before that, you were a young Frenchman of Cameroonian origin who learned to develop photography at 15 in a club in France. Then you left to study in Montreal. What drove you then?"
When I started doing photography, I had nothing to do with jazz. I was at a boarding school in Milan, and every Wednesday I learnt to shoot and develop images. And that's how I got hooked on images. And I learnt chemistry to be able to make all these mixtures to shoot photographs. And that's how I got into photography.
Puis le jazz en lui-même, c'est beaucoup plus avant même. C'est-à-dire que quand j'étais tout petit, mon père était...
When I was very young, my father was a medical student, and often on weekends he would listen to a lot of jazz and a lot of music, Afro-music, Afro-American music.
Beaucoup de musique afro-américaine. Et moi, à l'âge de 4 ans, j'étais...
And at the age of 4, I was already receptive to all that. But I didn't know at the beginning that it was going to take over me, that it was going to... Well, you know, when you're a kid, you absorb it all. And then when you're older, you think, where did that come from? You ask yourself questions when it's a whole life experience. All this stays, you keep it inside you, and sometimes it comes out and sometimes it doesn't. And in my case, as I love music, it's inevitably jazz that has invaded me. It has invaded my whole life, my daily life.
Mon quotidien. Voilà. Et puis aussi, il faut dire que quand je suis allé à Montréal...
And also, when I went to Montreal, it was the ideal place for jazz because there's a big jazz festival there. And I could see my idols, Aretha Franklin, Charlie Horn, and many jazz musicians that I would never have imagined meeting.
N'aurais jamais imaginé rencontrer.
France, Cameroon, it is through your family that you were initiated to the world of jazz in Africa, to the jazz clubs in Douala, for example?
Oui, ma famille, mais c'est surtout mon père.
Yes, my family, but it's good. It's mainly my father who took me to my first jazz concert with Rhoda Scott, who our dear late Manu Dibango had brought to Cameroon for a jazz residency from Thursday to Saturday night.
Au samedi soir, Rhoda Scott était installée dans un club.
Rhoda Scott was in a club playing, and my father told me, one day, come on, I'll take you to a concert. And that's when I got into jazz. I saw my first jazz concert. I must have been 13 or 14 years old. Yeah, that's it. When I was 13 or 14, I told Rhoda Scott about it, and she was amused.
Ça l'a amusé, quoi.
And the link between photography and jazz, how did this happen?
Alors, le lien, c'est parce que...
The link once again was made by chance, because when I came back from Montreal, I had to go for a report about a hip-hop group at the time called Skunk.
Un groupe de hip-hop. À l'époque, il s'appelait Skunk. Bon, le Skunk. Et
And that day there was no photographer because I was writing at that time. I wrote a lot. So as I said, as I remembered, I had always taken pictures. I'll take some pictures and then we'll see. So I went on a report and I took some photos. And when I returned, they told me, "Oh, your pictures are very good. Continue." And then I started to meet a lot of jazz musicians, and every time I interviewed them, I wanted to have a picture of them. And I had my little camera. They would pose for me. So that's it. It was always after the interviews. There was always a picture I would take of them. But I didn't think about making books or exhibitions out of them. In the beginning, it was really about having them for myself.
You're a great observer of the African musical scene. How is jazz being transmitted in Africa today? Does it have a bright future? I mean, as bright as its past?
Alors le jazz,
So jazz in the beginning, well, Africans didn't know that jazz was born from slavery, and there was a whole process.
Le jazz était né de l'esclavage et tout. Il y a eu tout un processus. Et même avant,
and even before, and also after, some sailors came to Africa with some jazz records and all of that.
Des disques de jazz et tout ça. Mais aujourd'hui, le jazz.
But today jazz is transmitted through festivals. There is a jazz festival in Ouagadougou. There is one in the Ivory Coast and there is one in South Africa. There's one in Cameroon and there's one in Benin. Finally, almost all of Africa is starting to be invaded by jazz festivals. At the same time, there are also musicians like Ray Lema, musicians like Etienne Mbappe and Richard Bona, Lionel Lueke, and many musicians. I can name a lot of them.
Une nouvelle comment dirais-je, scène musicale.
A new, how shall I say, a new musical scene that also plays with great musicians like Herbie Hancock.
Enfin, il y a beaucoup de musiciens de jazz africains.
Many African jazz musicians have traveled the world and sometimes come back to Africa and share their experiences with other Africans. They do initiation workshops on drums like Paco Seri. They do a lot of exchanges. They teach local musicians how to play jazz. And that's how jazz comes back to Africa, through these exchanges.
C'est comme ça que le jazz
and these African musicians going back and forth to the United States.
Va et vient avec les musiciens africains qui vont aux États-Unis ou même
or even to Europe. And then they come back to do their workshops in Africa.
En Afrique.
Samuel Nja Kwa, thank you very much.
Merci.
Well, that's it. Initiative Africa is over for today. You can find the interview of Samuel Nja Kwa as well as our shows on our website, africaonair.com. And of course, feel free to follow us on all our social media channels by liking, sharing and commenting with the hashtag Initiative Africa. And don't forget, next week, same time, same channel, I'll see you again for a new edition of Business Africa. Have a great week and until next time, goodbye.